In the grand mansion, sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, a mix that seemed almost unreal to anyone who had not grown up in wealth. Today, the mansion was alive with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, as the millionaire had invited some of his closest friends for a private party. Every detail was perfect, from the crystal chandeliers to the neatly arranged hors d'oeuvres, but there was an air of tension underneath all the luxury. In the corner of the large drawing room, a young maid moved quietly, carrying a tray of drinks. She was small and unassuming, dressed in a simple uniform that contrasted sharply with the sparkling gowns and tailored suits around her. She tried to stay invisible, keeping her head down as she served the guests, but it was impossible not to notice the grand piano that sat near the center of the room. Its polished black surface gleamed under the light, and the ivory keys seemed to beckon to anyone who might dare to play. The millionaire noticed her immediately. He was a tall man, sharply dressed, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that demanded attention. He had watched her move around the room, careful and silent, and a smirk appeared on his face. There was something about the way she glanced at the piano that sparked his curiosity, and then a cruel idea came to him. He enjoyed testing people, especially those who he considered beneath him, and the thought of embarrassing the maid made him chuckle quietly. "Bring her here," he said, his voice carrying through the room. The maid froze, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't used to being noticed, and certainly not in this way. A few of the guests glanced at her curiously, some smiling, others raising their eyebrows in amusement. She felt a wave of fear mixed with embarrassment, but she did as she was told, her legs moving as if on autopilot. When she reached the piano, the millionaire's smirk widened. He leaned against the edge of the piano and looked around at the guests. "Let's see if our little maid here can play," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Sit down and play something for us. Let's have a little entertainment, shall we?" The guests laughed lightly, some whispering among themselves, expecting a spectacle. The maid's hands trembled as she reached for the bench. Her eyes flicked to the keys, and she took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside her. She had always loved music. Since she was a child, she had been drawn to the piano. But life had never given her the chance to study formally, and her talent had remained a private joy, something she practiced in secret whenever she could. Now, here she was, forced into the center of attention, the eyes of dozens of people on her, including the man who wanted nothing more than to humiliate her. Fear threatened to take over, but she reminded herself that she could do this, that the music was hers, and that no one could take it from her. The millionaire leaned closer, his smirk fading into a more expectant expression. He didn't want a performance, he wanted a failure. He wanted her to stumble, to fumble with the keys, and to feel the sharp sting of embarrassment. The guests whispered among themselves, some eager to see her fail, others curious about what might happen. The room was thick with tension, and every eye seemed to be waiting for her first note. The maid's fingers hovered over the keys, and for a moment, nothing happened. She closed her eyes briefly, letting her mind focus solely on the music she loved. Then slowly, she pressed down on a key. The note rang out clear and pure, cutting through the room like a small bell. It was simple at first, a soft melody that didn't demand attention, but it had a beauty that no one expected. The guests paused, surprised by the unexpected clarity and confidence of the sound. The millionaire raised an eyebrow, his amusement flickering into a hint of surprise. Encouraged, the maid let her hands move more freely across the keys. The music flowed naturally, as if it had always been a part of her. The room seemed to change around her. The whispers quieted, the laughter stopped, and even the guests who had been mocking her leaned forward slightly, captivated by the unexpected talent before them. She felt herself relax, the fear melting away with every note she played. It wasn't about the audience anymore, or the man who had tried to humiliate her. It was about the music, the joy of playing, and the moment she had dreamed of for so long. The millionaire shifted slightly, a frown forming on his face. He had expected failure, but this was something entirely different. The maid's fingers danced across the keys with precision and grace, her melodies rising and falling like waves. It was as if the piano itself had been waiting for her touch, responding to her every emotion and thought. The guests were silent now, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. They had never seen her like this, and many of them realized they had underestimated her completely. She played a piece that was both simple and complex, a tune that spoke of her quiet strength and hidden depth. Every note seemed to tell a story, one of perseverance, humility, and passion. The sound filled the grand room, wrapping around the chandeliers, the marble floors, and the polished wood, turning the mansion into a concert hall. Even those who had come to mock her found themselves caught in the spell of her music. The millionaire could hardly believe what he was seeing. His plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliation, he was witnessing something extraordinary. The maid, whom he had thought of as insignificant, was commanding the room with her talent. His smirk had vanished completely, replaced by an unfamiliar feeling, admiration, mixed with a touch of guilt for having underestimated her. As she played, the maid felt a sense of empowerment she had never known before. The fear that had gripped her when she first approached the piano was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. She realized that her love for music was stronger than any humiliation, stronger than the cruel intentions of the man who had forced her to perform. The keys beneath her fingers were no longer instruments of potential embarrassment. They were her voice, her way of expressing herself in a world that had often ignored her. When she finally ended the piece, there was a moment of absolute silence. The guests blinked, processing what they had just heard. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, tentative at first, and then growing louder and more enthusiastic. Some of the guests were on their feet, clapping and cheering, their faces lit with genuine admiration. The maid looked up, her heart racing, and met the eyes of the millionaire. For the first time, he was speechless, unable to speak or respond to the beauty he had just witnessed. It was a moment that changed everything. The maid had walked into the room expecting fear and humiliation, but she had come out with respect and recognition. Her music had spoken louder than any words, proving that talent and courage could triumph over arrogance and cruelty. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the room itself was celebrating her victory. As the applause continued, the maid quietly stood, her hands still trembling slightly from the effort and the emotions of the moment. She had done what she never thought she could, and in doing so, she had shown everyone around her that true skill and passion could not be hidden, no matter the circumstances. The millionaire, still silent, watched her with a mixture of astonishment and newfound respect. He had intended to embarrass her, but she had turned the situation into a triumph, leaving everyone, including him, speechless. This was only the beginning of her journey, but it was a powerful start. The young maid had faced her fear, played with all her heart, and emerged victorious. The music had done what words could not. It had told her story, revealed her talent, and earned her a place in the hearts of those who had once doubted her. And for the first time, she realized that her life could change in ways she had never imagined, all because she had dared to play. After the first piece ended, the room was filled with an air of awe. The guests could not believe what they had just heard. Many of them whispered to one another, expressing surprise and admiration for the young maid who had just turned a moment meant for ridicule into something unforgettable. The millionaire, who had planned to make her feel small and powerless, now found himself at a loss for words. He could feel a mixture of shock and admiration brewing inside him, something he had not expected. The maid stood quietly, unsure of how to react to the applause. She was not used to being the center of attention, and yet the music had carried her beyond her fear. Her fingers still hovered near the keys, feeling the lingering vibrations of the last notes. Every sound she had produced felt like a step into a new world, one where her talent was finally seen and appreciated. Her heart was still racing, but there was a newfound confidence in her posture. She had faced the mocking gaze of the millionaire and emerged with dignity and power. The guests began to murmur excitedly, some complimenting the skill and control she had shown, others asking each other where she had learned to play. No one could pinpoint her background, and that mystery made her performance even more captivating. The room, once filled with expectant laughter, now held a quiet respect. Every eye was drawn to her, and for the first time, she realized how much impact her music could have. The millionaire took a step closer, his expression unreadable. He had expected to hear clumsy notes and faltering hands, yet what he had witnessed was extraordinary. A part of him wanted to acknowledge her talent immediately, but pride and surprise kept his voice silent. Instead, he gestured subtly for her to continue, a small sign of curiosity mixed with disbelief. The maid hesitated for a moment, glancing at him, then slowly placed her hands on the keys again. She decided to play another piece, one that required more confidence and expression. This next piece was different. It was a melody she had composed herself over many quiet nights, practicing in secret whenever she could. The notes flowed naturally, telling a story of struggle and hope, a story she had lived through but rarely shared. The room seemed to shift with her music, as if the walls themselves were listening. Guests leaned closer, their conversations dying down, replaced by an almost tangible tension that only music could create. The air vibrated with emotion, and the maid's fingers moved gracefully across the keys, bringing life to the tune that had lived in her heart for so long. As the melody progressed, she noticed subtle changes in the expressions of the guests. Those who had smirked earlier were now mesmerized, unable to look away. Their eyes shone with admiration, and some even appeared to be holding back tears. The maid felt a strange sense of warmth and acceptance wash over her. It was not just her skill that impressed them, but the emotion and honesty in her playing. Every note carried her truth, and everyone present could feel it. The millionaire's eyes widened as he realized how much he had misjudged her. The arrogance and cruelty he had planned to use to dominate her had been completely ineffective. She was not afraid of him anymore. She was commanding the room with nothing but her talent and grace. Pride and ego clashed inside him, and he was forced to confront the fact that his assumptions had been wrong. This maid, whom he had seen as inferior, was far beyond what he had imagined. Encouraged by the growing admiration, the maid allowed herself to become more expressive. Her hands danced across the piano with fluidity and confidence, creating harmonies that seemed to reach into the hearts of everyone present. The music was no longer just a performance. It was a bridge between her world and theirs. Each note carried emotion, telling a story of resilience, courage, and quiet strength. The guests felt connected to her, transported by the melodies that spoke directly to their hearts. Some of the guests whispered among themselves about how unusual it was to see someone from such humble beginnings possess such extraordinary talent. The contrast between her quiet, unassuming presence and the power of her performance was almost magical. Everyone realized that she had not needed luxury, formal training, or recognition to create beauty. Her music was proof that true talent comes from passion, persistence, and the willingness to express oneself honestly. The maid felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. She no longer played to prove herself to the millionaire or to avoid humiliation. She played to share her heart and soul with those around her. She could sense that the room had stopped being a place of judgment and had become a place of admiration and respect. Her confidence grew with each note, and she began to enjoy the attention in a way she had never expected. Music had become her voice, and she realized that she could say things through it that words could never express. The millionaire, still standing nearby, watched her carefully. There was a new understanding in his gaze, mixed with a hint of guilt for his earlier intentions. He had underestimated her not only in talent but also in courage. His plan to embarrass her had completely failed, and in its place, she had demonstrated something far more powerful than anyone could have anticipated. He began to feel an unfamiliar sense of respect, not just for her skill, but for her character. She had remained calm, composed, and graceful under pressure, turning a moment designed to humiliate into one of triumph. The music continued, carrying with it a sense of story and emotion that was impossible to ignore. The maid's hands moved effortlessly, blending delicate touches with bold movements, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to envelop the room. Guests who had been dismissive before now listened with rapt attention, each person captivated by the skill, emotion, and courage displayed in every note. It was as if the mansion had transformed into a grand concert hall, with the maid as its brilliant, unexpected star. As she played, the maid reflected on her journey. Life had often been difficult, and she had faced countless moments where she felt invisible or underestimated. Yet, here she was, standing at the piano, proving not just to the millionaire but to everyone around her that her worth could not be measured by her position or appearance. Her music was her declaration of strength, and she felt a sense of liberation that was both exhilarating and humbling. When she finished the second piece, the room erupted once more in applause. The sounds of clapping, cheers, and admiration filled the space, and for the first time, the maid felt truly seen and appreciated. The guests, who had come with expectations of ridicule or entertainment at her expense, now looked at her with genuine respect and awe. She smiled quietly, her heart full, knowing that she had accomplished something remarkable. The millionaire stepped forward, his usual confidence replaced by cautious admiration. He realized that he had misjudged her completely. His plan to embarrass her had backfired, and in the process, he had witnessed something extraordinary. For the first time, he understood that true talent could not be measured by social status, appearances, or preconceived notions. The maid had shown him that excellence and passion could rise from any place, and he could only watch, humbled and speechless. As the guests continued to praise her, the maid allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. She had faced fear and humiliation, and yet she had emerged victorious. Her music had spoken where words could not, and in doing so, she had transformed the room from a place of mockery to a place of admiration. The tension that had once filled the space was gone, replaced by warmth, respect, and a sense of shared human connection. By the end of the evening, the young maid realized that her life could never be the same. The experience had given her confidence, recognition, and a taste of the opportunities that her talent could bring. She had learned that courage and skill could overcome even the most difficult situations, and that sometimes the world only needed a chance to see the truth. The music she had shared was not just a performance. It was a statement of who she was, and it had left an indelible mark on everyone present. The millionaire, still processing the events, quietly nodded to himself. He had intended to embarrass her, but she had turned the situation into a display of brilliance, resilience, and grace. He realized that he could not underestimate anyone again, for talent and courage often reside where they are least expected. The maid had not only survived his challenge, she had transformed it into a triumph that would be remembered by all who witnessed it. And as the evening drew on, the mansion seemed to glow with a new energy, one that celebrated talent, bravery, and the quiet power of the human spirit. The young maid, once invisible and overlooked, had stepped into the light, showing the world that true strength comes from within, and that every person has the potential to amaze, no matter their circumstances. The room had fallen completely silent after her second performance, as if the guests were afraid to break the magic that had filled the air. The maid's hands hovered above the keys for a moment, taking a breath, feeling the power of the music she had just shared. She knew that the moment she was living was extraordinary, yet she also felt a sense of calm within herself. The fear that had gripped her when she was first called to the piano had disappeared completely, replaced by determination and pride. The millionaire, standing close by, could hardly look away. His arrogance had been challenged in a way he had never experienced before. The smirk that usually played on his lips had vanished, replaced by a look of curiosity and perhaps even respect. He had expected clumsy attempts and embarrassment, but what he had witnessed was far beyond anything he could have imagined. Every note she played revealed not only skill but also depth of feeling and an understanding of music that was rare even among professionals. Encouraged by the silence and the shifting energy in the room, the maid began to play another piece, this time more complex than the previous ones. Her fingers moved with fluidity and confidence, touching each key with precision, creating harmonies that intertwined beautifully. The music was expressive and powerful, yet gentle, drawing everyone in with its sincerity and emotion. Guests who had once laughed now leaned forward, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. The sound seemed to wrap around the room, filling every corner and capturing every heart. As she played, she noticed subtle changes in the expressions of the millionaire and the guests. Some had tears in their eyes, while others sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how someone so young and seemingly unremarkable could produce music with such depth and emotion. It was not just technical skill. It was the honesty in her playing that touched everyone. She was telling a story through her fingers, a story of resilience, hope, and the courage to rise above expectations. The millionaire's pride battled with his amazement. He had wanted to humiliate her, to show everyone that she was beneath him, but she had completely turned the tables. He could not help but acknowledge, at least silently, that she possessed a rare gift. Each note she played seemed to emphasize the difference between what he had expected and the reality he now had to face. The contrast was striking, and for the first time in a long while he felt humbled. The maid's confidence grew as she continued. She played with emotion that had been hidden for so long, feeling the room respond to every note. She was no longer performing for an audience or to prove herself to anyone. She was playing because it was part of who she was. The music carried her story, and in doing so, it connected with everyone present in ways that words never could. Each guest felt the sincerity of her performance, recognizing the courage it took for her to stand there and share herself so openly. The room's atmosphere transformed completely. Laughter and whispers of mockery had disappeared, replaced by admiration and awe. People who had come to watch her fail now sat in silent reverence, captivated by the artistry and passion she displayed. The maid felt a sense of pride and satisfaction she had never experienced before. She had faced her fears, played her heart out, and in doing so, earned the respect of everyone around her. As the piece reached its climax, her hands moved faster, yet with control and elegance, creating layers of sound that seemed almost magical. The guests watched in amazement, realizing that the talent they were witnessing was not just a fluke, but the result of dedication, practice, and natural ability. It was as if the music itself had a life of its own, and she was merely guiding it, allowing it to flow freely and touch the hearts of those listening. The millionaire, who had been a figure of intimidation moments before, now stood silently, unable to intervene or even speak. He felt the impact of her talent deeply, a mixture of surprise, respect, and perhaps a little regret for underestimating her. He could see clearly that she had transformed the situation entirely, taking what was meant to be an embarrassing moment and turning it into a powerful demonstration of her abilities. It was impossible not to feel the effect of her music. The maid noticed a few guests subtly leaning closer, trying to catch every nuance of the melody. She understood that her music was connecting with them, reaching places where words could not. This realization fueled her performance further, giving her energy and passion. She played with more confidence, knowing that her talent was being recognized, and that her courage had led her to this moment. She was no longer afraid, and that freedom allowed her to express herself fully. Time seemed to slow as she continued, the mansion itself appearing to listen. Each note resonated in the room, creating an almost tangible atmosphere of wonder and admiration. The chandelier lights sparkled above, reflecting the movement of her fingers, and the marble floors seemed to echo the vibrations of her performance. It was a moment suspended in time, a memory that would linger in the minds of all who witnessed it. The millionaire could not help but reflect on his intentions and how they had been completely thwarted. His desire to mock her had been met with the strength of her spirit and the brilliance of her talent. He had underestimated her courage and skill, and that realization humbled him. For the first time, he understood that respect must be earned through action, not assumed through wealth or position. The maid had taught him that lesson in the most powerful way possible. As she finished the piece, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone was holding their breath, reluctant to break the magic. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, soft at first, and then louder, building into a chorus of admiration and amazement. Guests stood, clapping enthusiastically, their faces lit with genuine joy. The maid allowed herself a small smile, feeling the warmth and validation that came from being recognized not just for her talent, but for her courage and resilience. The millionaire stepped back, his usual confidence tempered by awe. He realized that his attempt to humiliate her had failed completely, replaced instead by a moment of revelation. He had been forced to witness true talent, dedication, and heart, and he could not deny it. The maid had transformed the room, not with words or status, but with her music and spirit. She had shown that talent and courage could overcome expectations and prejudice, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. As the applause continued, the maid quietly acknowledged the guests with a nod. She had gained more than admiration. She had gained a sense of self-worth and validation that had been missing for so long. Her performance had proven to herself, as well as to the millionaire and the guests, that she was capable of greatness. The fear that had once held her back had been replaced by a quiet confidence and a recognition of her own potential. The millionaire, observing her from nearby, realized that this experience had changed him as well. He had intended to embarrass and assert dominance, but he had been humbled by the young maid's talent and courage. The lesson was clear. True skill and strength are not defined by status or wealth, but by dedication, passion, and the willingness to face challenges with grace. He could not help but feel respect for her, a respect that went far beyond mere acknowledgement of her musical ability. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere in the mansion had shifted completely. What had begun as a moment intended for ridicule had become a celebration of talent, resilience, and human spirit. The maid had captured the hearts of everyone in the room, leaving an impression that would not soon fade. She had taken a situation meant to belittle her and turned it into an unforgettable moment of triumph and inspiration. The maid stepped back from the piano, her hands still tingling from the intensity of her performance. She looked around at the faces of the guests and saw not just admiration, but a recognition of the strength and courage she had displayed. In that moment, she understood that her life had changed, that the barriers of expectation and underestimation could be broken, and that she had the power to shape her own destiny. The music had been her voice, and it had spoken louder than anyone could have imagined. The millionaire, finally finding his voice, offered a brief nod of acknowledgement. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight, a silent recognition of her talent, bravery, and the transformation she had inspired. He had witnessed firsthand that true greatness is often found in unexpected places, and that humility and respect are earned, not assumed. As the evening progressed, the maid remained a quiet figure of admiration, having achieved something remarkable. Her courage, skill, and the emotional depth of her music had left everyone speechless and inspired. She had faced her fears, embraced her talent, and turned a potentially humiliating moment into one of empowerment and recognition. It was a night that would be remembered by all who witnessed it, a night when music and courage overcame prejudice and expectation, leaving a lasting impression on every heart present. The room had settled into a calm that felt almost sacred, the echoes of her previous pieces still lingering in the air. The guests were no longer merely observers. They were participants in an experience they could not have anticipated. The young maid, standing at the piano, felt a sense of connection with the room that she had never felt before. Every glance from a guest, every quiet sigh of appreciation, seemed to affirm that her music had touched them deeply. Taking a deep breath, she placed her fingers back on the keys. This time, she allowed herself to play freely, without hesitation, without thinking about the expectations of the millionaire or the curious eyes watching her. The melody she began was slower, more deliberate, allowing the notes to breathe and carry emotion. It was a song of resilience, a story of rising above fear and doubt, and the room seemed to listen with bated breath. The lights of the chandeliers glimmered like stars above, reflecting in her eyes, and for a moment, she felt as if she was no longer just in a mansion but in a world created by her own music. The millionaire, who had watched her with a mix of pride and disbelief, leaned forward slightly. His earlier smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by concentration and silent admiration. He had seen many things in his life, But this performance was unlike anything he had witnessed. It was not simply skill. It was soul. Each note carried weight and depth, telling stories that no words could convey. He could feel the power of her music pulling him in, challenging his perceptions and breaking down the walls of arrogance he had built around himself. Guests around the room were leaning closer, captivated by the delicate, yet commanding performance. Whispers of amazement filled the air, though none dared to speak loudly, as if the music itself had created a sacred space that demanded respect. Faces that had once shown skepticism now glowed with admiration. Some closed their eyes, letting the melodies wash over them, feeling emotions that had long been dormant awaken in their hearts. The room was silent except for the notes flowing from the piano, creating an atmosphere both intimate and grand. The maid allowed herself to get lost in the music, letting her fingers dance over the keys with ease and confidence. She played faster now, yet with absolute control, each chord resonating with precision. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, not in a showy way, but naturally, as if she were an extension of the piano itself. The music was no longer just sound. It was a conversation between her and the room, between her heart and every soul present. She could feel the emotions of the guests, their surprise, their admiration, their awe, and it fueled her performance even more. The millionaire, observing her closely, began to feel a shift within himself. He had expected to dominate the situation, to show his superiority and humiliate the young maid. Instead, he found himself humbled, moved, and even inspired by her courage and skill. Each note reminded him that true greatness cannot be forced or bought. It comes from dedication, passion, and the heart. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. He had tried to belittle her, yet she was now elevating the entire room with her music. The maid's playing became more expressive, incorporating soft, delicate passages followed by bold, commanding sequences. She was no longer playing to prove anything to anyone. She was playing because she could, because it was part of her being, and because she wanted to share the emotions she had kept inside for so long. Each note was infused with her personal story, her struggles, and her triumphs. The guests felt it, their emotions reflecting in their faces, some with tears glistening in their eyes, others with wide, amazed smiles. The room had been transformed, every surface, every listener affected by the power of her performance. The millionaire watched her with growing respect. He had underestimated her in every way and now realized the depth of his misjudgment. Her courage and skill were undeniable, and he could feel the weight of his own pride and arrogance melting away in the presence of her talent. The young maid had not just performed. She had conquered fear, turned humiliation into strength, and in doing so, taught a lesson that he would not soon forget. She had created beauty where he had sought to create shame, and that contrast humbled him completely. As she continued, the maid noticed a subtle shift in the guest's demeanor. The whispers and anticipatory glances had disappeared, replaced by rapt attention and silent admiration. People were leaning forward, following every movement of her hands, captivated by the fluidity and grace of her performance. The music created an invisible thread connecting everyone in the room, a shared experience that transcended social status or expectation. She felt the connection deeply and allowed it to guide her playing, weaving emotion and technique into a seamless tapestry of sound. The melody swelled, rising to a crescendo that filled the room with a sense of grandeur and triumph. Her hands moved with precision, speed, and elegance, each note striking with clarity and intention. It was a moment of release and declaration, an expression of everything she had felt and endured. The guests held their breath, completely absorbed in the performance, and even the millionaire, usually composed and in control, felt himself swept up in the emotion. He realized that her music had power beyond mere entertainment. It carried truth and authenticity, something far more compelling than wealth or status could ever achieve. As the final notes approached, she allowed herself a moment of reflection in the music, a gentle decrescendo that left space for emotion to resonate. The room remained silent for a heartbeat, suspended in awe, and then slowly, applause began. It started softly, tentative, but quickly grew into a wave of appreciation that filled the space. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, and expressing admiration not just for the music, but for the courage and talent of the young maid who had captivated them all. The maid smiled quietly, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. She had turned what could have been a moment of embarrassment into a triumph, a celebration of her talent and resilience. The applause and admiration were not what drove her performance, but they were a welcome acknowledgement of the effort and courage she had displayed. She felt seen, respected, and appreciated in a way she had never experienced before. This was a turning point, a moment she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The millionaire, still standing near the piano, finally found his voice, though it was quiet and hesitant. He could not offer the mocking remarks he had intended, nor could he dismiss her performance. Instead, he nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of her talent and the transformation she had brought to the room. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight, a silent admission that he had been wrong and that the maid had surpassed every expectation. He felt a mix of humility, admiration, and surprise, recognizing that her courage and skill had revealed something powerful and unforgettable. The guests continued to express their admiration, some approaching her to offer congratulations, others simply nodding and smiling, still in awe of what they had witnessed. The room buzzed with a sense of inspiration and appreciation, a stark contrast to the initial tension and expectation of embarrassment. The young maid had not only performed brilliantly, but she had also transformed the energy of the space, turning judgment into admiration and skepticism into respect. As she stepped back from the piano, the maid felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had faced fear, pressure, and the expectation of humiliation, and she had emerged victorious. Her music had spoken louder than words, telling her story, sharing her emotions, and connecting with everyone in the room. She realized that this was only the beginning of her journey, but it was a powerful start, a moment that would define her confidence and belief in her abilities. The millionaire, reflecting on the events, understood that he had underestimated her completely. His intention had been to belittle, yet he had been humbled, inspired, and moved by her talent. He realized that respect, recognition, and admiration must be earned, and she had earned all of them effortlessly. He felt a newfound awareness of the power of humility and the importance of acknowledging talent, regardless of social status or expectation. By the end of the evening, the mansion had been transformed not just by music, but by the courage and authenticity of one young maid. She had proven that talent and heart could overcome fear and judgment, and she had left an impression on everyone present. Her performance was not just an act. It was a statement of resilience, skill, and the quiet power of determination. It was a night that would be remembered, a night when music became the voice of courage and the bridge to admiration, respect, and inspiration. The room was filled with an electric energy, the kind that happens when something extraordinary takes place. The young maid stood at the piano, her fingers poised to continue, but she took a moment to let the silence speak first. The audience was fully captivated, leaning forward, holding their breath, as if waiting to see what she would do next. She could feel their anticipation, but rather than fear, it gave her strength. The earlier nerves had vanished completely. Now, she played with purpose, with passion, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing one's own worth. The next piece she played was more intricate, weaving delicate melodies with bold, dramatic passages. Each chord resonated with emotion, telling stories of hardship, determination, and hope. Her hands moved with grace, skill, and a fluidity that made the piano sing under her touch. The guests were spellbound. Every note seemed to linger in the air, filling the room with a warmth and intensity that touched the hearts of everyone present. The music wasn't just heard, it was felt, deeply and personally. The millionaire, still watching, could barely comprehend what he was seeing. He had intended to humiliate her, to assert his dominance and reinforce the perception of his superiority. Yet now he found himself utterly disarmed. She was not only playing beautifully but also commanding the room with a presence that he could neither ignore nor diminish. He realized, with a mix of awe and humility, that he had underestimated her completely. She was not just talented. She was extraordinary. As the melody developed, the maid allowed herself to get fully lost in the music. She played faster in some parts, slower in others, adding subtle pauses that emphasized the emotion behind each note. It was a performance that transcended technique. It was storytelling through sound. Each chord carried her feelings, her experiences, her silent resilience. The guests felt it. Some had tears in their eyes, others had their hands clasped in admiration. They were no longer mere observers. They were participants, connected to her story through the language of music. The energy in the room was palpable. The chandeliers seemed to shine brighter, reflecting the movement of her hands and the intensity of the moment. The walls, the furniture, even the guests themselves seemed to absorb the music, carrying it in a shared experience of awe and respect. The young maid had transformed the mansion from a space of social expectation and judgment into a sanctuary of emotion and beauty. Every note she played reminded everyone that true talent cannot be suppressed or ignored. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably, aware that his attempt to embarrass her had failed in the most spectacular way. His pride had been challenged, and in its place, he felt something entirely unfamiliar. Respect, admiration, and perhaps even a touch of regret for his earlier intentions. He realized that she had not only proven her skill, but had also displayed courage, composure, and authenticity. She had turned a moment meant for humiliation into one of inspiration and triumph. The maid's performance reached a crescendo, the music swelling with power and emotion. Her hands moved with incredible precision, yet they were fluid, expressive, and entirely natural. The audience was captivated, leaning forward as if drawn into the melody itself. Some closed their eyes to absorb every note, while others watched with rapt attention, their faces reflecting the emotions stirred by her music. It was a moment of pure connection, a demonstration of how art can bridge gaps, touch hearts, and create unity. As the climax of her piece arrived, she allowed herself to play with abandon, letting her emotions guide her fingers. The music soared, powerful and moving, filling every corner of the room. Guests felt their hearts lift and their spirits stirred. They could sense the depth of her talent and the courage it had taken to perform under pressure. Every sound reinforced that she was not just playing notes. She was speaking her truth, sharing her story, and asserting her presence in the world. The millionaire's reaction was one of silent awe. He had tried to dominate and embarrass her, yet she had not only survived the challenge but had turned it into an undeniable display of brilliance. He could see clearly now that talent, determination, and authenticity held a power that no wealth or arrogance could match. For the first time, he understood that respect must be earned, not assumed, and that true greatness often appears where it is least expected. The music began to slow, transitioning from the intensity of the climax to a gentle, reflective conclusion. Each note was deliberate, allowing the emotions to resonate and linger. The guests remained silent, fully absorbed, not wanting to interrupt the spell she had cast. They were witnessing more than a performance. They were witnessing courage, strength, and the transformative power of talent. The young maid had taken a situation that could have been humiliating and made it extraordinary, leaving a lasting impression on everyone. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, savoring the lingering emotion. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, soft at first, then building into a powerful wave of appreciation. Guests stood, clapping enthusiastically, some even cheering, their faces alight with admiration and joy. The young maid allowed herself a small, humble smile, acknowledging the audience's praise, though her heart was still racing from the intensity of the performance. The millionaire stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine recognition and respect. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement that spoke volumes without words. He could no longer dismiss or belittle her talent. She had proven her abilities and her courage in a way that was undeniable. The realization was humbling and perhaps even transformative. leaving him to reconsider his assumptions about talent, courage, and respect. The guests continued to offer their praise, some approaching her to express admiration, others simply nodding with silent acknowledgement. The atmosphere was completely changed from what it had been at the beginning of the evening. Where there had been judgment, there was now admiration. Where there had been expectation of failure, there was now recognition of brilliance. The young maid had turned a moment of potential humiliation into a celebration of skill, courage, and the human spirit. As the applause died down, she stepped back from the piano, feeling a sense of fulfillment and pride. She had faced fear, doubt, and the scrutiny of an audience and emerged not only successful but also transformed. Her music had spoken where words could not, expressing her story, her emotions, and her strength. She had proven to herself and to everyone present that talent and courage could overcome expectation and prejudice, leaving a lasting impression that would be remembered for a long time. The millionaire, reflecting on what had happened, understood the lesson she had imparted without words. He had intended to embarrass her, to assert his superiority, but she had demonstrated a power far beyond his own. The power of skill, resilience, and authenticity. Her performance had been a reminder that true greatness comes from within, and it can shine in the most unexpected places. He felt a mixture of humility, admiration, and a quiet sense of inspiration, realizing that she had changed not just the room, but perhaps even his perspective. By the end of the evening, the young maid had achieved more than just applause and admiration. She had claimed recognition for her talent, proven her courage, and inspired everyone who had witnessed her performance. She had transformed a potentially humiliating moment into one of empowerment, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of all who had seen her play. The room, once filled with judgment and expectation, had been transformed by her music, courage, and authenticity into a space of respect, inspiration, and admiration. As the guests slowly began to leave or continue with their conversations, the maid stood quietly near the piano, reflecting on what had just happened. She realized that her life had changed, that the world had seen her not as a maid or someone to be underestimated, but as a talented, courageous individual capable of extraordinary things. The experience had given her confidence, validation, and the knowledge that she could face challenges with grace and skill. It was a night she would carry with her forever, a night when she had truly shined. After the applause had finally settled, the young maid stepped away from the piano, her hands still tingling from the intensity of the performance. Her heart was racing, but it was a mix of excitement, pride, and relief. She had faced fear, scrutiny, and humiliation, and she had emerged victorious. The room, once filled with judgment and anticipation, was now alive with admiration and respect. Every guest seemed to carry a sense of awe, whispering quietly to one another about the incredible talent they had witnessed. The millionaire, who had stood nearby throughout the performance, finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm, carrying a weight that drew everyone's attention. He acknowledged her talent, her courage, and the way she had transformed the situation. His tone had changed from mockery to sincere admiration, and it was clear that he had learned something valuable about respect, humility, and the unpredictability of true talent. The young maid listened quietly, accepting the acknowledgement with grace, knowing that she had earned it not just from him but from everyone who had witnessed her performance. Guests began approaching her one by one, expressing their admiration and congratulations. Some offered compliments on her technique, others on the emotional depth of her music, and some simply praised the courage it had taken to play under pressure. She listened, smiled, and thanked them sincerely, feeling a sense of validation and joy she had never experienced before. The experience had been transformative. It had shown her that her skills and her heart were capable of making a profound impact. As the evening continued, conversations among the guests shifted. Instead of talking about the social hierarchy or the intended humiliation, they discussed the music, the talent, and the unexpected brilliance of someone they had underestimated. It was a reminder to them, and to the millionaire, that assumptions and judgments often fall short in the face of genuine skill and courage. The maid had shown them all that excellence could emerge from the most unexpected places, and that true talent speaks for itself. The young maid felt a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could not have imagined. The recognition she had received opened new possibilities, opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. People would now see her differently, not as someone to overlook or underestimate, but as an individual with talent, determination, and a story worth paying attention to. It was a moment that would forever alter her path. The millionaire, reflecting on the events, understood the lesson she had imparted without words. He had sought to assert control and belittle her, but she had shown that strength comes from within, and that courage and talent can transform even the most difficult situations. He felt a mix of humility, admiration, and inspiration, realizing that he had misjudged her from the start. Her performance had not only impressed him but had challenged him to reconsider how he viewed others and what true greatness meant. The maid's music had done more than entertain. It had built connections. Guests were inspired, moved, and reminded of the power of talent, passion, and perseverance. She had turned a potential moment of shame into a lasting memory of triumph, proving that fear could be overcome and that personal strength can shine when it is needed most. The impact of her performance reached beyond applause. It touched the hearts and minds of everyone present, leaving an impression that would not fade. As the evening drew to a close, the young maid found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her here. She remembered the early days of secret practice, the quiet moments of frustration and hope, and the countless times she had wondered if anyone would ever notice her talent. Now, standing in the glow of recognition and respect, she understood that every moment of effort had been worth it. The fear that had once held her back had been transformed into courage, and her music had become the voice through which she could share her story. The millionaire approached her once more, offering a sincere nod and a few words of praise. He acknowledged that he had been wrong to doubt her, and that her performance had changed not only his perception of her but also his understanding of talent, courage, and human potential. His recognition, though small in gesture, carried immense significance, representing a shift in his character and a deeper appreciation for the qualities she had displayed. The young maid accepted it with grace, knowing that her actions had spoken louder than any words. Guests continued to mingle, but many kept glancing back at the piano, still amazed by what they had witnessed. They had come expecting entertainment, perhaps even a spectacle of humiliation, but they had received something far more profound, an inspiring display of skill, courage, and the human spirit. Conversations focused on admiration for the maid, her music, and the transformative power of her performance. The mansion itself seemed to hum with the energy of what had occurred, a lasting reminder of a moment that would not soon be forgotten. For the young maid, the evening was a turning point. She had discovered her own strength, validated her talent, and earned the respect of those around her. She understood that her life had changed, that doors previously closed were now open, and that her potential had been recognized. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a drive to continue developing her music, and a belief that she could face any challenge with courage and grace. The experience had given her confidence and inspiration that would guide her for the rest of her life. As the mansion emptied and the evening came to a close, she lingered for a moment near the piano, touching the keys lightly, feeling the vibrations of the music that had flowed through her. It was a personal, reflective moment, a time to absorb the significance of what had occurred. She realized that her music had not only touched others but had also transformed her, giving her a sense of empowerment, clarity, and vision for the future. The piano had been her instrument of expression, courage, and triumph. The millionaire watched her quietly, still processing the impact of the evening. He had learned that assumptions and attempts at dominance can never replace genuine talent and determination. The young maid had shown him that true greatness can emerge from humility and hard work, and that courage and authenticity are qualities that command respect beyond any social standing or wealth. He had witnessed something extraordinary, and it had changed his perspective on people, talent, and the meaning of achievement. In the days that followed, the story of the young maid and her extraordinary performance spread among those who had attended. People spoke of her talent, her courage, and the way she had transformed a moment of intended humiliation into one of inspiration and admiration. The recognition she received was not fleeting. It was a lasting testament to the power of talent, perseverance, and the human spirit. Her story inspired others to pursue their passions and to trust in their own abilities, regardless of obstacles or expectations. The young maid herself felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had faced fear, endured scrutiny, and yet had emerged stronger and more confident than ever before. Her performance had not only showcased her skill, but had revealed her character, her determination, and her ability to rise above challenge. She realized that her journey was just beginning, and that the experiences of that evening would guide her as she continued to grow, perform, and inspire. The mansion, once a place of tension and social expectation, had become a symbol of transformation and human potential. Through her music, she had demonstrated that courage and talent could overcome fear and judgment. Her story became a reminder to all who witnessed it that true strength lies in perseverance, self-belief, and the willingness to share one's gifts with the world. The young maid had proven that even in moments designed to belittle, one could rise to greatness, leaving a lasting impact on everyone around them. As she left the mansion that night, the young maid carried with her not only the memory of her performance but also the understanding that her life had been irrevocably changed. She had earned recognition, respect, and a sense of empowerment that would guide her in all her future endeavors. The evening had been a turning point, a moment where talent, courage, and authenticity triumphed over expectation, creating a story that would inspire and resonate far beyond the walls of the mansion. She knew that her journey had just begun, and that the music she loved so deeply would continue to open doors, touch hearts, and change lives, starting with her own.